Hello and welcome to Read. Today we've got the second of our 3 end of year videos. The first one I just did, which I'm really happy and I think came together quite well, was one sentence on every book I read in 2024. This video is going to be my 2024 book awards, where I spend a little bit more time actually highlighting and talking about why I liked certain books and certain reads, and just giving out arbitrary rewards for the sake of rewarding literature for being literature. And then the third and final video, which will either come out late 2024 or very early 2025, is going to be a combined Q&A and just talking about what my plans are for the next year on the channel. And it was kind of funny. I was actually really insecure about the Q&A. I thought I would get like 3 questions, and so I just said, oh, I'll tack it on to that video, but yeah, now the Q&A is going to be quite long. So thank you for that. There's still some time to get some questions in. So yeah. Anyway, let's get started. We'll talk about the general accomplishments and achievements of reading this year. I have 16 categories that pretty much similarly follow my last year's book awards. But before I get started with that, I'll just talk about how last year I had... At the end of last year's video, I did all the book awards, and then I talked about how I wanted to read, or how I wanted to approach reading this year, and certain things that I wanted to do and accomplish, and certain changes in the way that I read. And I thought I'd quickly talk about whether or not I actually achieved that. So some of the big things, the only big fixed reads that I had for that year were that I wanted to read for 4 particular books. I wanted to read The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. I wanted to read The Golden Bough by James Frazier. I wanted to read The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton. And I wanted to read the abridged Mahabharata by miscellaneous Indian author. And I actually ended up getting around to reading the first 3. I didn't read the Mahabharata just because I ended up actually being gifted for my birthday the unabridged Mahabharata, which is 5,000 pages and is sitting over there. But I, basically just ended up thinking, well, do I read just one of the books? And then it ended up kind of getting away from me, and I didn't get a chance to read any of them, but still really happy and really proud of going through and reading the other 3 books. The other ideas, or the general ideas that I wanted to do, were to read a little bit more fragmentally, which I didn't necessarily do this year, but one thing that I did do, that I did consciously try to implement, and I think relatively successfully, was to read more female authors, just because, of course, in the realm of classic literature, there's a lot of the works that survive are works that are written by men. So I did try to kind of consciously make an effort to not postpone certain books by female authors, and just to say, well, no, now's a better time than ever. I may as well read, more works by like the Brontes or something like that. And I didn't end up taking any statistics of like male to female authors that I read this year versus other years, but it was definitely more. And So the other thing, I did want to read some longer books, which I did do, but I have some more plans for reading even longer books, which I'm going to go into in my next video. Anyway, without further ado, I've been dawdling and wasting your time for too long now, so let's jump into the book awards. The first one is just the yearly book or page total, which is that this year I read 52 books, and it was a total of 18,768 pages. That's a little bit on the lower side than I usually read, but I'm happy with it, because I did implement my idea of wanting to read some longer books like Second Sex, Golden Bough, etc. So a general standout though, something I noticed, is that even though this year did have the kind of one great book that I read, I wouldn't say that it was sort of banger after banger this year. It was a little bit like, it was kind of a different dimension this year in terms of the books that I read. I wouldn't necessarily call a lot of them my favorite reads, but I was pretty glad that I read them, and I feel like I've become a more fleshed out reader having read the books that I read this year, which, if you want a pretty quick way of knowing what I read this year, I recommend just going and checking out the last video where I just give one sentence on all of them. Anyway, moving on, the next category is the surprisingly good read. For these categories, I've also decided to just choose one book. Last year, I chose a lot, and I just didn't want any doubling up or any wasting time. So, for the surprisingly good read this year was The Way by Swans by Marcel Proust. It's the first book in his In Search of Lost Time series. I unfortunately don't have the physical copy, and in my last video, I told you that I would tell you why I don't. So, basically, I have some housemates, and one of my housemates in particular really love him. He's also a reader, he's also a writer, and he was reading Proust based on my recommendation, and he was saying, oh, yep, he really loved it, he really enjoyed it. And however, unfortunately, he lost his copy, but he was about halfway through, and he just misplaced his copy of the Way by Swans. And so he asked if I had a copy, and I said, oh yeah, I do, sorry, it's got some annotations, I hope that's okay. And he was like, oh yep, nope, that's fine, whatever. He's going through, reading it as normal around the house. We were talking about it, having a great old time. And then, perhaps expectedly, he lost my copy as well. But it was kind of funny because he was at the gym, he read the final sentence, he finished the book, and then it disappeared. And so we were joking that Proust, so you know how there are like certain diamonds or certain gems? I think in Chinese culture this happens with jade, but also black tourmalines, like a necklace that I used to wear as well. They have this property where they're kind of protective or they're defensive stones, and when you lose them, it's basically a sign that the stone has magically intercepted some danger or some calamity that has occurred in your life. And so I was joking that Proust has done the same thing for my friend, where he was about to make some sort of great blunder, perhaps a writing blunder, but Proust sacrificed himself to avoid that calamity occurring twice. So yeah, fortunately my friend is safe and sound, and he's just gonna buy me another copy of The Way by Swans. But yeah, that's why I don't have The Way by Swans anymore. But nevertheless, to come back to the book itself, I made a video talking about it. I actually was sort of recommended or persuaded to read it by Maria from the channel Strange Lucidity, and yeah, it was just Proust sort of subtly unlocks these new dimensions or new senses. But yeah, if you want some more opinions on that, I recommend going and checking out the video. The Way by Swans was my surprisingly good read of this year. My favorite reading accomplishment definitely has to be finally finishing the Australian Concise Oxford Dictionary. This was about a year worth of reading, going through and taking notes of, some favorite words that I like. Perihelion is a good one. Periloon. Perlocution. Perjury is a good one. What else have we got? Racketeer. That's an awesome word. And a lot of these are words that I know, but I just wanted to remind myself of them and wanted to kind of reintegrate them. But yeah, I don't know, just it's now funny that this is when I open up my Storygraph to track my reading and I just say sort by largest or longest page count. It's always just like dictionary, 1700 pages. So yeah, I finished reading this and I made a video, which again I go and recommend you watch because it was a great April Fool's video. Reading the Concise Australian Oxford Dictionary was my favourite reading accomplishment of this year. My favourite new author. There were a lot of authors that I could have chosen. Could have said Lispector, could have said Proust, but in terms of an author that I discovered this year and then went on to read like more of their stuff, I'm actually going to end up giving it to Anne Carson. It's a bit of a kind of wild card. There's also another book that I read this year is Eros the Bittersweet, which I don't have here. But yeah, I just kind of on a whim read Eros the Bittersweet. I was really kind of seduced by the title of the book. And I knew that it was when I read that essay, I was like, wow, I'm really experiencing this mind that I'm quite curious about. And I've gone through and now read Autobiography of Red, Glass and God, and also Red Doc. I went through all of these this year. I'm a huge Anne Carson stan now, and I'm just looking forward to reading and buying more of her stuff. The book that I'm surprised I actually read, this category, I just made it last year because I read the Bible last year, and so I kind of knew it was going to be hard to fit in a category, but a book or an author that I'm surprised that I read is actually, I'm surprised at the quantity of Samuel Beckett that I read this year and how much it's really sunk in. So before this year, all I'd read was Waiting for Godot, but then this year I read his complete dramatic works and also his trilogy, Malloy, Malone Dies, and The Unnameable. I made a video for each of these 3 books, and it's surprising just because now Beckett feels so much like an old friend when really it was only this year that I started reading him proper. And so perhaps I'm stretching the definition of, surprised that I actually read it, but maybe it's more about surprised at how much it's influenced me and how much I was able to just get completely sucked into Beckett and just read, all of his dramatic plays cover to cover without needing any break or moving on to any other works. And a similar thing with the trilogy, just read all of them all the way through. The most unique book I read this year, I was tempted to give this to David Markson's This Is Not a Novel. However, if I hadn't read Reader's Block last year, it would be a no-brainer that would be the book that I would choose. However, just going through, I wouldn't say uniqueness was necessarily a quality of the books that I read this year, but maybe the most unique one would be Gustave Flaubert's The Dictionary of Accepted Ideas. I made a video about this and I really loved it. I'm currently reading, honestly, I'm about 500 pages through Flaubert's letters, and this is going to be a video in maybe late Jan. But again, I'll talk about that in my next video. The best short story collection I read this year was without a doubt the complete stories of Clarice Lispector. Finding out about Lispector was a really kind of wow experience. I still haven't dived in to read her novels, but I'm very curious and keen to read her collection Too Much of Life, which I'll be reading hopefully pretty soon, or at least part of my next year's reads. The best short story, and I know that this is, so the best individual short story, not as part of the collection. I know that this is going to sound dumb because I don't even remember the title, but the short story that I read that really stuck with me was a short story that appeared in Ryunosuke Akutagawa's collection In Dreams, where, again, I can't remember the name of the story, but it's something like The Swamp or Swamp One, where a person goes to a museum and he sees this really grotesque work of art on the wall, and it's kind of sloppily done. It's not the perfect work of art, but the person who's looking at it, who has dealt with depression, looks at the art and recognizes this intrinsic depressive quality in the work, and it automatically becomes beautiful to him. And there's also an art curator, director, person, just miscellaneous character there who's looking at it and just berating the artwork for being bad quality, but the person who's reading it has just intrinsically found and just truly believes, like, no, this is a beautiful work of art because it has this one specific quality of being able to convey kind of insanity or depression or anything like that. Just really stuck with that, and obviously I can see why that was a pertinent theme to Akutagawa's work. That was my favorite short story of the year. The best essay collection that I read, overall, I would probably say it was Walden. I liked Economy within it, but just as a total experience, I loved reading. I loved reading Henry David Thoreau, and I mentioned in my one sentence that it's not like I want to go and live deliberately in the woods and build my house and live off the land. But just because of general life things, this book kind of came to me at the right time, and so I'm very sentimental about it now, and I really appreciate Thoreau's writing style. It's very much a non-fiction Walt Whitman. And the best single essay, I know that you might technically say that this is in a collection because it's just one book, but the best single essay I read this year would be Eros the Bittersweet by Anne Carson. Next up, the best book purchases. This is one category where I'm going to add more than one just because there were a couple of really awesome book purchases this year. I really discovered some used bookstores and started going to a bookstore called Burklow Books, which have a couple of locations. I included them in my video of my favorite Sydney bookstore, but just some books. Here's some books that I got from Burklow, which I really enjoyed. This is Library of America, Writings of Gertrude Stein. This collection is from 1903 to 1932, and then this collection is 1932 to 1946. I got these for 25 Australian dollars each, which converts to about 15 or 16 US dollars or euro. And yeah, just a really awesome, like they're in excellent condition, you know, nothing wrong with them as far as I can see. And then also another book that I got, which I don't know, I don't think this is rare or anything, but it's just become my go-to sort of reading before bed or just flicking through when I'm bored. But it's from the collection of the publisher Taschen, who do a lot of art books. This is the Hermetic Museum, Alchemy and Mysticism. And I love that there's not really any essays or anything like that. It's just collections of art that all focus on a category, like purification here, or like torment of the metals here. And yeah, it's just kind of trippy to flip through and say I want to see and bask in some visual works of art that all have to do with animal riddles. Well, just go and consult the Museum of Alchemy and Mysticism, of course. And I got this from Burklow as well for a pretty good price. As always, I go to the yearly UCID book fair, the Chancellor's Book Fair, and I always make a book haul video about that. The best purchase I got from there was this edition of Ulysses, which I didn't realize is, so it's a fifth impression. This is published in 1966. It's in amazing condition for a nearly 60-year-old book, and I looked it up online, and this goes for quite a bit of money. I think someone is selling this for about $100. So yeah, and I'm really glad that I looked this up, because I was like, hey, I bought this for $4. I'll write in this collection. I'll use my sticky tags, whatever. No, so now I'm going to go back and write in my Wordsworth edition and keep this one in a relatively safe place. And the last book purchase, which I don't physically have on me, but it's obligatory, it's my great impulse buy of the year, was to purchase the complete unabridged Golden Bow by James Frazer. I spotted it on eBay for, I think, a pretty decent price. I'll put a picture up on the screen so you all can see what it looks like. And yeah, it was just having that collection, I was like, wow, this is firstly the most I've ever spent on anything, on any book related thing, but just having it after having read the Golden Bow and being like, no, I need the whole collection, found it for a great price, went for it, rice and beans for a couple of weeks, but you know, those were my best book purchases of the year. The most challenging read of the year would probably have to be Faust by Goethe, especially part 2, and I won't put it up on screen, but as a little bit of a Easter egg, this is kind of funny. You know how when you go to a YouTube video and you see it, if you hover your mouse over the screen, it plays a little bit of a display for 10 to 15 seconds, or maybe just like 5 seconds of the video. Go and hover over my video of Faust part 2, which I think accurately conveys what my experience was reading Faust part 2. The most fun book I read, probably aside from the Dictionary of Accepted Ideas, would have to be At Swim Two Birds by Flann O'Brien. I really love this sort of balance of postmodern and sort of being open and talking about the sorts of techniques that are being used in the process of writing. It's an Irish inception that follows some writers whose characters he invents turn on him. It's a romp. I really recommend it. The best poetry collection I read this year, it was a bit hard to choose a collection. There wasn't a really standout. I was essentially tossing up between this and Blake's Songs of Innocence and of Experience, but in terms of just it being a collection, I'm going to actually give it to the selected poems of Rumi. And yeah, I kind of liked this a lot more than I ought to. I felt like it was going to be I feel like I know the sort of poetry that Rumi has inspired, and I don't necessarily love that sort of poetry, but actually going back and reading it, there's a lot in here that I ended up enjoying. So yeah, this is the Selected Poems of Rumi, and it was my favorite poetry collection this year. My favorite single poem, without a doubt, has to be The Glass Essay by Anne Carson. And lucky last, my new favorite book. I know I feel like I've talked about this in every single video since having read it, but I cannot shut up about it. It is The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton. I know that not a lot of people are going to read this because it is quite a large book, and it can be a little bit, not complicated, but a little bit of a slog. But at the very least, I'd maybe even recommend reading the first section, the Democritus Junior to the Reader. But yeah, I also made a video talking about it. Standing out, this is my favorite book of the year, one of my favorite books of all time now, probably my favorite non-fiction book ever. And so like I said, I'm going to save talking about 2025 for my next and the third video, the Q&A, and just follow-up reading updates. There are going to be some changes to the channel, but I'll let you see what that's about. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for sticking through these book awards, and thanks for sticking with my channel throughout the year. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.